that moment, I was back in, and I loved him for that moment.
This is McClaren Performance.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of the McClaren Performance Podcast, the podcast where I talk to my dad about everything football, performance, psychology, and together we try and provide something useful for those of you listening. Now this week we have plenty to talk about as we reach the end of the season, and with that, most notably Liverpool have the chance to do the quadruple. They already have the Carabao Cup and also most recently the FA Cup under their belt, leaving the Champions League, of which they're in the final, and the Premier League, where they are right behind Man City. So a great achievement already with the possibility of more to come. But what is it about them that has made them such a good team, the good team that they've been, I think, for the past few seasons now? And as always, I've got my dad here to discuss that with me. Dad, how are you?
I'm good, Josh. How are you? I know we're doing this and then you're dashing off to the Newcastle game. So
not bad. I'm busier than usual, actually. I've got to fit this in and then I've got to go to, I'm going to miss the first half, Newcastle, Arsenal, which I've got free tickets to, thanks to the women's team. But I'm always more committed to the McClaren Performance Podcast more than anything.
Well, well done. Dedication. I mean, we do occasionally struggle. We've got to thank Dave Roberts for putting up with us and making
He's
sure that
hero.
we're linked together. He is. And he actually gets us on this podcast. So he's done great for us. And it's been a great weekend of football, hasn't it? Saturday, the cup final, and then Sunday, twist and turns in the Premier League.
I think the first thing we'll touch on really is that FA Cup game. I mean, I was at work at the same time it was on, so I was trying to watch it at the same time, and I think I caught the penalties at the end, and so I don't have much to reflect on it, but I imagine you watched it just as much as everybody else. What was your reflections on that game specifically against Chelsea? Because in regards to the quadruple, it's fine margins in terms of winning games, and it certainly seemed like that in that Chelsea game.
Again, it's similar to the Carabao Cup. How can two very, very good sides play a game, 120 minutes, and don't score a goal when the record is their goal scorers, especially Liverpool? So to have two games like that is incredible. And it just shows you the randomness of football when, another day would have taken two or three of the chances that they had. On another day, Chelsea also maybe two or three chances. So the game on the chances produced should have been 3-3. Instead, it was 0-0. It just shows that's the randomness of football. And at the end of the game, it was a great game. I think extra time, we got to scrap extra time because it's just a plod. The intensity and energy was all in the first 90 minutes. After that, nobody could move and players are going down injured. So I think that should be scrapped. Go straight to the penalties. And of course, penalties produces unbelievable drama. And again, unbelievable drama and unbelievable randomness. And it is a lottery on the day. And I know that we're going to talk about a lot of preparation for penalties, and you certainly can. And that's been proven. But nowadays, I think everybody's prepared or should be prepared mentally to take a penalty. But it's amazing that the boy, Tsimikas, is it?
Yeah.
Back, that was the first penalty he's ever took in his life. And he scores a winning goal and ends up the hero.
I think there's been a lot of discussion about, I think there is an aspect of it. There's a lot of randomness to penalties when it comes to that specific moment. I mean, there's been a lot of talk of the preparation work and the psychology that goes into actually winning penalties. The main point that Klopp made at the end was how they've been working with a neuroscience team, I think called Neuro 11. And I'd seen it before a while ago and mentioned it on here as well, I think, but it's more prominent now after the penalties in terms of how they've trained brain activity in these set piece situations, which includes penalties, obviously, and how they've done so well in it because of that. Well, it's argued that did they do so well because of that, or is it the like you said, the randomness of the game, or listening to O'Hara on TalkSport. And I don't know if he has made any good points, really, but this is quite dismissive of sports psychology in general, really, and its impact on things like that. In terms of that situation, you're right. I think the randomness of penalties, it just can't. Yes, it plays a factor, but I don't think a great factor, really. But in terms of how you can manipulate that, maybe not so much. It's within that minute moment, but over the course of, how they've played, I think it has a big impact. You look at there's a great article that they did at Neuro 11 about with Liverpool, and it was in February, I think, and it said from that 14 of their 61 league goals are from set pieces, and that's more than any other top flight side. And that's almost about a third. And that's at that point there, that was one more than they had the whole of last season. And that's with the implementation of this Neuro 11. And then in Champions League, that's 5 goals from set pieces as well. So I think there is a science. Of course, there's a science. There's a psychology, and they're utilizing that with this neuroscience work to get the best out of players, to get them in the zone when they're actually taking these set pieces. But within the instance of that, I think there's been a lot of talk in the penalties about how Klopp, communicated with the players in comparison to Tuchel. He gave them the right, you're taking, you go this way, you go that way. He did it quickly. He had enough time to have a laugh with Van Dijk or whatever. I don't know. Like, that's what people have been saying. Well, whoever said it. And this idea that I think it's more so a reflection of, yes, his man management and how he works. And maybe that reflects more so on their successes in the season before. But I think in footballers make the case, yourself would make the case as well, that within penalties, it's so hard to control, I think, the process of the player necessarily when they're actually going into that. Is that what you'd suggest? Is that what you think?
Right. Yeah, look, Liverpool win. So whatever Klopp has done
yeah.
in that time. And I think
better than anyone. That's exactly it.
And it was funny, Jamie O'Hara arguing that, Klopp was perfect in his, was very quick, decisive, precise. And then Tuchel was, 2 minutes going through a sheet of paper, talking to his players. And that's not whether they win or lose. And absolutely right. And I think Ali said that, well, to be fair, Klopp got it over with and gave the players a lot more time to think about the pressure of the penalties.
Yeah.
And you could argue that Tuchel kept his players there, kept them focused, kept them ready. And it was a shorter time in between end of game and taking a penalty. That's typical media talk. And again, the randomness of football. It just so happened that if you win, everything that you did worked.
Yeah.
And you're the hero. When it's a combination of things, of everything, of the information from the goalkeeping coach to the goalkeepers. We keep forgetting about the goalkeepers, that you have to get past them. You might take the perfect penalty. You might take a really good penalty. And what I saw from them penalties was that there was a lot of bad ones and the goalkeeper went the wrong way.
Yeah.
If it had gone the right way, it would have been me and you would have saved them. So it's the randomness of the goalkeeper. Yeah, okay. But it's the randomness of the goalkeeper choosing which side to go down. The interesting one on Mane was that he was against Mendy, who's the goalkeeper of Senegal. So he would have taken hundreds of penalties in the African Nations Cup against each other. So, and he was the one that missed for Liverpool. And I always thought, this is going to be difficult. The choice of a player who's taken 100 penalties against Mendy, which way do I go? But also the goalkeeper. Which way shall I go? I bet he's taking a Panenka. I take his right side, left side, low, high, all kinds of penalties. Wouldn't know. And he just happened to choose right. And that's gambling. That's, playing with dice. But I think the process, what you can do, and that brain article I thought was absolutely fantastic. It's about getting players in the zone. And especially on set pieces, which Liverpool have obviously done because they're top of the league in set pieces. And preparing for penalties is key. And I relate it to what me and you have been doing the last few years also with the academy, with golf, and also playing golf. The first thing they teach you is you must have a process before you hit the ball, which basically means you have to get in the zone, fully concentrated, fully focused, so that you hit that ball behind the ball in the exact spot where you want to hit it, and the ball will go exactly where you want it. So it's like a penalty. So you address the ball, you walk up to the ball, like in golf, and you address it. And everyone says go through a process. And I think the Brain article was very good in terms of everybody is individual. Everybody has a different process. You see that in golf. You saw that in the penalties. And they give an example of one player might think, I focus totally on the ball, on the walk, focus on the ball, and I'm in the zone. And that's the key, getting the player in the zone. He's not thinking about the outcome. He's not thinking about the crowd. He's thinking about the now, the there and now. That's the key. Similar to golf, a process. One thing, in a process, I know in golf, I've got 3 things, breathing, practice stroke, visualization of the shot, hit it, and that's my process. Penalties can be one or 2 things. Focus on the ball and where I'm going to hit the target. Focus on and each player is different. Like each player is different getting ready for a game of football. Because me as a coach, I said to my staff, psychologists, whoever, just get me the players ready to play. So they're ready to play at a certain level of aggression that is not above over-aggressive and is not below passive. And we'll talk about that probably a lot more in terms of the Leeds game, which was the second game that I went to watch. But in terms of penalties, if you focus like that, I can see it and you go through the process. But also remember, the goalkeeper's doing that as well.
Yeah.
So I think you can train penalties. They do train penalties. But as I say, the randomness of a penalty shootout is that Tsimikas has never taken a penalty in his life. He just steps up nice and casual, right frame of mind, probably no pressure. I don't know, but scores a penalty that wins the game.
Yeah. So
you can train it in one respect, but we know in football through 30 years of experience in coaching and 15 years in playing, it's a game of randomness. And that game should have been 3-3. It was 0-0. You play it again tomorrow, it probably will be 4-4. And people will take the chances. So it's randomness, but it's actually getting the players prepared and ready for a set piece delivery, corners, wide free kicks, a set piece or a free kick outside the box, a Ronaldo, a Beckham. And I used to train with Beckham. He had an unbelievable process, went through it every time, even in practice, went through it every time to get they call it the automatism. And it's a great word. And it's one of the word that I took out from my time in Germany was automatism. I said, what? To make things automatic. They repeated. So it became automatic when they stepped up and had to execute. Like the golfer, like the footballer, like the tennis player with a serve. These are the moments where you actually can prepare for where the game stops. It's you and the ball.
And I think in football, you're right. There's the randomness, and I think what Liverpool do well is within the randomness, they're trying to control the controllables. Like for example, they have a set piece coach, or they have a throwing coach. And that's the Neuro 11 thing. The neuroscience is controlling the controllables, because you're right that the keeper can go one way or the other. They can make their judgment. That's the thing that's out of your control. But within your own decision making, I think it is important to use that sort of thing to make sure that you are in the zone in that moment, fully committing to a decision that has been decided beforehand of where the right way is to go and executing that. And that may not have happened on the day of Liverpool or not. I'm not entirely sure. But just, I talked to you before, imagine if we had Neuro 11 And we went to our golf academy and we had all those kids playing. We were measuring them in the zone because that is an entirely individual sport, and the controllables in that sport are entirely 90% yourself, really, maybe the weather or whatever, but it's really within yourself. So to measure that within golf, and then I think we'd see massive improvements in golfers, especially with kids as well, as they learn to utilize that. But you're right, in football, it's kind of different. I think it's fantastic though what the Neuro 11 thing is, and I think it will most likely be a big part of football clubs in the future, because the problem with psychology, and it has been, is that kind of lack of objectivity, that wishy-washy. People think, oh, it's freaking quotes, it's this, it's visualization, which it is to a certain extent, but the objectivity that you can have with it, the measurement, it's great. What they have you see the video. If you go to a Neuro 11 website, they have a video where they show the Liverpool players like Salah and Trent as well, where they've got their heads in the whatever, they've got all the electronics on their back, and they're doing the set pieces, they're doing the penalties, and they're showing them the activity in their brain. I mean, the only thing I can imagine they're measuring, because they don't give away so much, obviously being a private company, they want to keep their secrets, they want to go sell it off elsewhere. But there is an aspect of when you're in the zone, when you're in that flow state, call it transient hypofrontality, where it's a decrease of neural activity, I think, in the prefrontal cortex, and that part of it is for complex planning and decision making and the understanding of future consequences of your actions. And we call that overthinking. Really, is that's the part of the brain that is thinking long term, thinking in detail. And when you're in the zone, that part of the brain goes off a little bit, so you're more instinctive in the moment. And I think that is essentially what they're training in the athletes, in the players, is they're showing them what's happening in certain moments. They went, oh, you focused on the ball there. See how the brain activity shows that you're in the zone, that you're really in the moment, right? Do that more often. So they're just using the stats of that to then train the players to then be in that moment. And I don't think it's the reason why Liverpool are where they are, but the reason why Liverpool are where they are is because they pay attention to these details. So many details that Klopp overlooks at all of that, and they've used that and utilised that where nobody else has before in Premier League football. And that's a small aspect of it, with everything else, which has got them, I think, to this position they're in, which is the quadruple, which is unbelievable, really, to be in that position. I think they've got fantastic players, but I think the size of the squad, you look at that in comparison to City, where City could almost have a great team coming off the bench as well, and Liverpool maybe not so much, but yet they're still in the fight for all these things coming up. I think it's unbelievable what they're doing. I think a large part of it is Klopp's management, really. And you talk about, the way he interacts with players before the penalty, that doesn't really affect the penalties on that day so much. But I think his behaviour and his leadership and how he acts in moments like that, he acts in moments like that throughout the past few seasons. And I think that is what contributes to the long-term kind of success of the team, if that makes sense.
Well, it's knowing your players, and that's the key. As we always say, that's the key. It's the relationship between manager and player, and knowing what that player needs and knowing the triggers. So he can go up to some players and have a laugh and a joke with them and relax them. And he knows he needs to go up to some players and go, hey, you're going to take the most important penalty here. You make sure that you're focused and on the ball, because you could win the game for us, and put all the pressure on that player's shoulder. Yeah. But he knows if it's, say, Salah, that he can handle that. Yeah. And that's the beauty of a manager, and that's the detail that he must know, and working with staff along that way. But football, what they do well, but football is a game, like rugby is a game, where it's total chaos and total randomness at times, and you get knocked. So it's like they say, the boxer's all prepared, he's ready to go, he's totally focused, he gets in the ring, he gets his first pop on the nose, his eyes water, he can't see a thing, he's out of the zone. He's in, he's out. And he's got to train to take that and refocus. Yeah. Footballers, in the 1,000 events in the game that you're involved in, some of them are good, some of them you're totally focused for. Others you might get a bad situation and you flare up and you get all emotional and you're totally out of focus. The key to the top performers is coming in and coming out of the zone and then getting back in the zone as quickly as possible. So I agree you can measure it, but then please tell me, how does that player quickly go from focus, gets kicked, or loses his temper, bad decision, out of focus, to I've got to get back into the game, and he's got to focus. That's the key. How do you do that? We've talked a lot about that in rugby, haven't we? In the red and the blue, they talked about the England team with Woodward in terms of what they do, going in the red zone, how to get back in the blue, and it could be like the cognitive behavioral therapy that they use. The fingers, finding some kind of trigger process. Again, we're back to process that gets you back into that moment that the golfer has to get to, penalty taker has, and they have time to get to it. In a football match, you've got no time. You've got to get back in that game. So that's the key in terms of, especially football. How do we teach players to make it automatic to go in the zone, get knocked out of the zone, and get back in the zone as quickly as possible?
That'd be great if that Neuro 11 could do that, and you could find a way of measuring brain activity in all sorts of situations, see how things change all the time. But that's what a good psychologist does, really, is finds those little things, those little triggers for players to use in the moment to get them back into the zone. Like, say, with there's imagery, and in terms of using the words as well, in terms of right, how do you want to play today? I want to play like this. We say it with the golf, don't we? When you do your swing, slow and steady, nice and simple. You keep that simple thought in your mind. It makes your action simple as well. And that's one, the interventions like that are a way of doing that for the players. But my argument is that what makes great managers anyway is that they set an environment through their leadership, and they provide a certain amount of psychological safety where players can feel they can take that risk and do those things. And then when they make those mistakes, when they get the whack, when they get the punch in the face, they're in a situation, in an environment where they feel comfortable enough to get up and continue to execute the plan. So they feel in an environment where they're not threatened at all. And I think that's what Klopp does incredibly well. I think we talked about it before. He has that directness with them. He has that grit to him where he's telling them what to do. You need to be doing this. And he has that directness with them. But I think he has that, and you said it, you got to know your players, and he knows his players, and he cares for his players. And the care helps the players feel safe, and it means they can act and do what they want to do on the pitch. But it also means that they can execute well as well in the moment. So I think it is the manager.
The manager is the psychologist.
Exactly. And that's why that's the good use of psychology is a coach shouldn't understand sports psychology and be able to implement it. They do not need to know the detail and the theory. No, it's not. It's the right. How do I need to be taught into certain players? What do I need to be doing? What are these simple, easy things? It's like the brain 11, the science. I don't need to know the science. Yeah, they just do it. But that's great. I need to know. Yeah,
know from them that middle bit when they're out of focus.
Yeah,
how to get them back into. So I don't need to know that the brains are frazzled and the neuros are here, there, or wherever. I've got to get them back in the zone.
Yeah.
Now with some players, I've got to know that player, and some players, it's shouting at them, and some players it might just be a look, a point of the finger. To every player, it's different. That one thing. John Robertson, famous winger for Notts Forest. He always used to say, Brian Clough never spoke to him, never said, well done, never spoke to. All he did was, when he did things wrong was rant and rave. When he did things right, he just looked at him and circled his finger and his thumb, and that's all he did. And he said, that moment, I was back in, and I loved him for that moment. And that was my moment. Now that is management.
Yeah,
that's not psychology.
Yeah,
that is management. Knowing your players, communication, relationship, and that's what the top coaches do. they know the player inside out. And that's, I say, is key to us as managers, coaches, to know the players and what gets them ready. What gets them ready? What knocks them out of the zone? What gets them back into the zone? You know, do I drop him? Do I leave him out? Do I continue to play him? You have to know this. And the players can actually give you the answer to that, which goes back to, again, communication and relationship.
Yeah. That's the quote from Fergie, isn't it? He says some people call it psychology, but I call it management. And that's from him. That's exactly it. That's what the best do. It's not a deep understanding of the theory, but it's a deep understanding of the people and the relationships. And that's why I always say about my philosophy, the foundation of it is the culture, is the environment, is the interaction of the people. And a manager should have a deep awareness of that and an understanding of how to manipulate it to use it to its advantage for when he needs players to be performing. And it's so hard to, it's not tangible. It's just like, it's instinctive for a manager to have that or not, or to possibly learn it as well.
It should be, automatism, automatic.
Yeah.
And I saw a great example of that kind of randomness and talking about being aggressive, being in the moment, being in the zone and being passive. Great example in the Leeds and the Brighton game.
Mm.
And Leeds came out, the biggest game of the season. They had to win. Or they had to at least get a point. And they came out in front of that Leeds crowd were unbelievable. But they came out passive. They came out passive. And Brighton killed them for 20, 25 minutes. And Brighton should have been 2 or 3 goals up, without a doubt. And Leeds should have been out of sight. So they got through that period. They were lucky to get through that period in terms of that. Then all of a sudden, on about 25 minutes, the midfield player, Polish player, Klitsch, he had a 50-50 tackle. He went right through the player, put him on the ground. Straight after, another tackle, put him on the ground. And he kind of stood up and would give it the old, the Hulk one, lost my temper.
Yeah.
And you know what? I went, and all of a sudden, the mood changed. The mood changed. It changed in the crowd because they actually saw a tackle. They couldn't get near him in the first 20, 25 minutes. They actually got a tackle. And 2 bodies were laying on the ground. And we as managers always used to love that. Love that. Love it. Yeah, just put them on the ground. Keep them on the ground. And Klitsch was the old like that. And everybody, all of a sudden, the mind that changed.
Yeah.
They went from being passive to aggressive. But aggressive in the zone. They weren't over-aggressive. So we saw a bad example, Everton, where they were over-aggressive.
Yeah.
Done, bump, tackle, 9 men, they got no chance. But Leeds got it spot on. And it galvanised the team. 1 tackle. You remember when we went to New York and we went to watch an ice hockey game? And the ice hockey game, the fans were firemen, policemen. They were real, hard physical men. That's why they loved ice hockey, because it was a hard physical game. And this team, New York, was 5-0 up, and the game was dying. And all of a sudden, put two players on, and they were brothers. And the guy who was sat with us said, "Oh, I'm going to see some action now." What? These two, well, come on. And all they want to do is fight. But it'll liven the crowd up. It'll liven us up because we were getting complacent. And these 2 brothers came on. It was chaos, wasn't it? Remember, they were fighting like mad. The crowd
I was
banging,
5, mine. I do not remember.
I know, yeah. I tell you, it was. And the crowd went mad, nearly fighting each other. The players on there were fighting. And the last 10 minutes was the best 10 minutes of the game, the most intense. And Leeds did that by that action. And for the rest of the game, they just committed. They just committed to go for it. And honestly, Brighton never got a kick. And especially second half, Leeds could have scored 2 or 3. Deserved the draw in the end, the point. And as a boy, I was a supporter of Leeds, so I hope they stay up in the Premier League. But it just shows, how you can be in the zone, and Brighton were in the zone, knocked out of the zone, and how difficult it was to get back in the zone. And they didn't join in the aggression. They carried on trying to do what they'd been doing by controlling the game, by no randomness, whereas Leeds went all randomness and chaos.
Yeah.
And in that chaos, they were a better team and better players. When it was controlled, Brighton were the better team and the better players.
It's not aggressive, it's assertive, isn't it? It's that controlled.
That's a good word.
Kind of aggression.
But I always say, to start, and I said it after was talking to a rugby guy, Brian Noble, very successful rugby league coach. And we were talking about getting the players to be aggressive. They've got to be aggressive, especially rugby, but also in football. Aggressive mentality. But I think your word is better, assertive. Got to be assertive.
Yeah.
Assert yourself on the opponent, on the game. Assert yourself. And if you are below that and you're passive and your opponent is aggressive, doesn't matter what tactics you use, formation, players, does not matter.
I think it's quite interesting just to add on top of that the psychology often don't quite consider the conflict that's actually in sport and how it's really a competition, like you kind of said, it's a competition of body language, it's a competition of communication, where it's almost like the arousal, the hormones in one team is competitive against the other. And you rarely have it really where they're both at that high level. It's usually one team dominating the other, both in the aspect of the psychology and the hormones that they have, and in other ways, the way that they play as well. And so it's always competition. It's always trying to hold that control for as long as possible. It's never going to be 100% of the time throughout the entire season. It's finding those moments where you can assert your body language, assert that communication, that dominance, have your fans behind you who are also asserting that dominance with regards to their body language as well. And it starts with that foundation there, then builds into a performance where, yes, in that randomness that they have within the game, they are in that zone because they are dominant in that moment and they're executing to the best of their abilities. And that's how a game can change like that.
And one great point to finish, when we talk about the squad game and we talk about the bench, and we always say, yes, the 11 have to be at that level, assertive, aggressive. How do you get into that zone when you coming off the bench, entering into a game and having to adapt to that? We always say make an impact. That's, could be a great study for substitutes, because they win or lose or draw you a game. Because the last 20 minutes, when chaos approaches, when players are tired, that's when you need your focus and concentration the most.
Well, thank you, Dad, for another interesting conversation. I think it's quite interesting to dissect that Liverpool situation. And I think it's the conversation around psychology within the penalties of that game, the FA Cup game, is quite interesting and kind of made in a way to dismiss how important sports psychology is. But that Neuro 11 team, yes, it does not make or break the penalties, but it brings such a contribution to a player in that moment having the most control, being in the zone and being able to execute that penalty. But also, again, the way to dominate games as well, I think is such an interesting topic, and how that starts with the foundation of communication, of body language, which is also the foundation of what's happening in here and the hormones that are going through your own body, having that testosterone, having that dominance in the moment, and finding those moments within the game to then get that, finding that moment in yourself as a player to think of the right thing, to control your own thoughts, your own mind, and outside of set piece as well in the game over 90 minutes, to control yourself as much as you possibly can to then get the result. That is where sport psychology comes in. And I think, yes, it is not the entire game, nowhere near. But for me, the foundation of it, the foundation that leads into the actual actions in the game and the actual results. So yeah, hopefully we'll see. Liverpool might get that quadruple in the end, we don't know. But in terms of what Jurgen Klopp is doing, in creating that environment, it may not contribute so much to the penalties in that moment, but over the course of the past few seasons, I think what he has done in those communications with those players absolutely contributes to their season now and the seasons before it as well. But yeah, a great conversation again, as always. And thank you for listening. Thank you for watching, and see you again next week.
This is McClaren Performance.